Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Colonel Frank Colley. Today marks 30 years since the beginning of Operation Desert Storm, the Coalition's offensive phase of the Gulf War of 1990 to 1991. The operation resulted in a stunning and conclusive victory. In response to Iraq's illegal occupation of neighbouring Kuwait on the 2nd of August 1990, the United Nations imposed sanctions and a US-led coalition was formed. Australia was quick to commit its forces. After 5 months on the defensive while the coalition built up their forces in the region, the United Nations set 15th of January 1991 as the deadline for Iraq to withdraw from Kuwait. When the ultimatum was ignored, coalition forces began their offensive in the early hours of January the 17th, 1991. It opened with a devastating 42-day campaign of airstrikes against Iraqi military targets and their capital, Baghdad. On the 24th of February, coalition ground forces crossed the border from Saudi Arabia and attacked Iraqi forces, rapidly destroying them. After 2 days, the Iraqis began retreating from Kuwait while setting fire to oil wells and dumping millions of barrels of oil into the Persian Gulf. Less than 100 hours after the start of the ground operations, a ceasefire was declared on the 28th of February 1991. Australia was one of 35 nations that contributed to the Gulf War. Of the 1,800 ADF members who deployed to the region, most were members of the Royal Australian Navy. HMAs Adelaide, Darwin, Brisbane, Sydney, Success and Westralia had helped enforce sanctions through a naval blockade of the Persian Gulf. Some 20 members of the Australian Defence Force participated in Operation Desert Storm, attached to US and British formations, and 4 ADF surgical teams served aboard the US hospital ship Comfort. After the ceasefire, Royal Australian Naval clearance divers from CDT-3 deployed to Kuwait, where they helped clear ports of mines and explosive ordnance left by the Iraqis. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. Please be seated if you can do so. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the hearts of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Private Albert Aubrey Bennie. Albert Bennie was born in Lancefield, a town to the north of Melbourne, around 1885, the fourth son of James and Louisa Bennie. Known as Bert, he went to school in the Melbourne suburbs of Moonee Ponds and Ascot Vale, and went on to find employment as a coach painter. Bennie enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force at Melbourne on the 7th of July 1915 and was allotted to the reinforcements for the 8th Battalion. A few months later, on the 15th of September, Bennie embarked from Melbourne on the troop ship Macquarie, bound for overseas service. He arrived on Gallipoli on the 7th of December 1915, where his unit was defending the beachhead at Anzac. With the evacuation of Gallipoli in late December, Private Bennie arrived in Egypt in early January. After the doubling of the AIF, during which the AIF expanded by raising new battalions, filling them with a mixture of new recruits and veterans of Gallipoli, in March 1916, Bennie and his battalion sailed for France and the Western Front. The men arrived at Marseille before heading for the Somme Valley in northern France. The battalion's first major action in France was at Pozières. Intended in part to divert the German army's attention from Verdun, the offensive around Pozieres saw Australian divisions wresting a small, devastated area from the enemy at a staggering cost. Over 42 days, the Australians made as many as 19 attacks against the German positions. The final casualties were around 23,000 men killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. The 1st Division, of which the 8th Battalion was a part, was the first to go into battle on the 23rd of July, 1916. The Australians managed to capture the village of Pozieres before being subjected to relentless artillery bombardment that reduced the village to rubble. The bombardment inflicted a huge number of casualties. Historian Peter Burness stated that for several weeks, Pozieres became the focus of the Somme fighting and the worst place to be on earth. Of the 23,000 Australian casualties, 6,800 men were killed or died of their wounds. By the time the offensive was abandoned in November, it had resulted in around 500,000 German, 420,000 British and Dominion, and 200,000 French casualties. The Allied forces had advanced no more than 12 kilometres. At some point, on the 25th of July, 1916, Private Albert Bennie was killed in action. His body was not able to be located after the fighting, and today he is remembered at the Australian National Memorial at Villers-Bretonneux, which commemorates over 10,000 Australian servicemen whose graves are not known. Albert Bennie was 31 years old. His grieving family regularly placed poems in the newspaper to remember his passing and mark the anniversary of his death. One of them reads, "No loved ones stood around him to catch his last faint sighs, or whisper just one loving word before he closed his eyes." His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Albert Aubrey Bennie, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. lest we forget.
We leave this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many man lying out there at Pozieres or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening.